We were running bomber missions into northern Russia just to see how far we could get. And that's why the Soviet Union ended up spending so much money on creating missile defenses and other defenses, because the United States was the provocateur. That's bad policy. That was just dumb cowboy antics, and we should never have done it.
In 1986, when new Kremlin head Michael Gorbachev meets Ronald Reagan, the USSR is on the brink of collapse. The Washington Post wrote that Robert Gates wasn't the kind of guy you wanted to invite over for the weekend.
I have no idea why the Post writes what they do. They had one person write about me on Soviet affairs one time that I was like Eeyore in the Winnie the Pooh series, book series, that I could find the darkest cloud behind this most silver lining, because I was so pessimistic about the Soviet Union.
I was skeptical of Gorbachev. I can remember telling President Reagan that, who rather liked Gorbachev, remember, Mr. President, this is the last remaining communist in the Soviet Union, because Gorbachev set out not to dismantle communism, but to fix it. He understood that it was broken.
There was no question that he was dismantling the Stalinist bureaucracy, but he had nothing to put in its place, and I think events proved me right.
Glasnost and perestroika basically got out of control, and I don't think he anticipated the collapse of the entire system. He wanted to keep it intact.
I thought Gorbachev was telling the truth. My concern was, and I actually it began in 1985, 86, right after he assumed power. I think we all underestimated the magnitude of the political changes that he would make.
1 year later, in 1987, Reagan challenges Gorbachev.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
I don't think anybody predicted it. I can remember standing next to Ronald Reagan when he said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear this wall down, and thinking to myself, well, that's very nice rhetoric, but it won't happen.
So they were very reluctant to put forward their views until quite a bit later. So that was an intelligence failure.
And we had a political revolution in the Soviet Union that we just didn't expect could happen.
If anyone thinks that Ronald Reagan won the Cold War, then they don't understand history. It wasn't Ronald Reagan and the buildup of our defenses that won the Cold War. It was the internal contradictions in a flawed political system, Marxist-Leninism, that brought the end, the inevitable end of the Soviet Union.
New American President George Bush is at the helm when the Soviet Union finally collapses. Deeply marked by the Cold War and his tenure at the CIA, Bush couldn't believe the USSR was really on its way out.
I did a memorandum for the president based on material when I was Deputy National Security Advisor in June of 1989, telling the president, based on the materials that I'd been reading from CIA, that I thought there was a very real possibility that Gorbachev would not be around more than another year or two, and that we should begin contingency planning not only for his demise, but for the collapse of the Soviet Union.
The fact that it did not predict the day, I think again, the intelligence agencies are not paid to be fortune tellers.
We understood that there was severe trouble in the Soviet Union, mainly economic trouble, but also some political. But to think that that would lead to a collapse of the Soviet political system was more than our imaginations would accept.
Everybody missed it. You couldn't, anybody that suggests you could say the Berlin Wall would be opened on November 9th is lying to you.
Did CIA analysis say that the Soviet Union was going to collapse in the way that it collapsed, kind of imploded? I think the answer is no, it didn't expect that.
Despite what they want to say today, it was, to a large extent, a surprise.
Nobody can predict anything like that, because the one that was most surprised was not me, who was in charge of the CIA side in charge of East Germany, but Erich Honecker, and Hans Mielke, who said, "What is this?" And they're running East Germany.
If we take the service, the intelligence service, with the greatest insight into what was going on in the Soviet Union, and that was the KGB, it did not foresee the collapse of the Soviet Union either, and its entire existence depended on the existence of the Soviet Union.
The CIA could not predict the collapse. But let me tell you, I was a KGB officer, a senior official of the State Security Intelligence. I could not predict it either. We in the USSR could not believe that we were approaching the end of the system.
It was very surreal for someone like me to spend my whole adult life in the Cold War, because for me and many of my colleagues, it was a world which it was hard to foresee it would ever change. I assumed the Cold War would go on as long as my lifetime, and therefore to sit in my offices at Langley and watch the Berlin Wall come down in November of 1989, to watch the Soviet Union collapse and be proclaimed dead in 1991, was an extraordinary experience. I mean, it was very hard to grasp that empire would end like a candle going out.
In November 1989, the fall of the Berlin Wall opens up the way for German reunification. One by one, the once democratic countries chase out their communist regimes. The Cold War comes to an end.
It's like the end of World War II. Everybody's tired. They don't want any more war. They don't want any more confrontation.
There was a kind of a, not demoralization, that's perhaps too strong a word, but the lack of this vigor, because the mortal enemy is no longer a mortal enemy.
The great Soviet experiment of 75 years or so is done.
Everything had stopped and there were no more problems in the world. We'd won the Cold War. The West in general had won the Cold War. We said to ourselves, well, that problem's over. Everything's going to be fine. We cut substantially back on our defense budget.
We dismantled our military and intelligence establishments. People said, well, who needs it?
You know, this is the end. We don't need CIA and all of that.
It had to have produced a dramatic change in priorities. Yes, the Soviet Union had been the principal target and basically the rationale for the formation of the agency.
You can't simply snap your fingers and say, we're going to shift all of this human intelligence to other places. It just doesn't work that way.
These people were very unhappy when the Soviet Union collapsed because they didn't have an enemy, so they had to create one.
The end of the Cold War caused us to shift a lot of different kinds of things and try to look down the road and understand what was going to be happening.
The CIA becomes idle, useless, and powerless after losing its one great enemy, its raison d'etre. At agency headquarters in Langley, former agents longing for the days when they were still likened to James Bond are called back to tell schoolchildren about the glory days of the CIA, 3 letters that have become a myth.
This is just to inform kids. So, way to put a human face, if you will, on the agency.
The story's over. That game is finished. It was a world where the Soviet Union here and the United States there, and we were in a game of chess to take as many pieces of the rest of the world as we could. And in the end, in 1991, the side that had the most pieces won. And they didn't win.
A few months after the collapse of the Soviet Union, former CIA Director William Colby and KGB head Oleg Kalugin co-host a reception in Washington to launch a video game. With no one left to fight it, the Cold War was indeed over.
Go on, it's Warhurst. We've got a situation. Good luck.
Every time you think the Americans can't get any dumber, they do something really fucked up.